Kusan has recently gotten a huge win by beating Monkey D. Garp, one of the strongest characters in the entire series. This is pretty interesting, as it was only 2 years ago in the story that Kusan himself suffered a massive loss by getting defeated by Akainu. The fact that he's managed to bounce back from this loss and go on to beat Garp is a great example that losing a fight does not mean game over in One Piece. In fact, in many cases, it is the opposite, and losses in this story consistently make characters stronger. Aokiji right now is very likely the strongest he's ever been, and he's a very good example of why other characters who've recently suffered huge losses in the story will likely come back far more powerful. Kusan essentially lost everything in his defeat to Akainu 2 years ago. The way Jinbei describes it, Aokiji, despite his relaxed nature, was dead set on not letting Akainu become the next fleet admiral. This is probably in no small part due to Aokiji's experiences on Ohara over 20 years ago, where he witnessed what kind of a man Sakazuki was when he blew up a ship full of innocent civilians. The two admirals agreed to fight in a death match on Punk Hazard, where the winner would get to lead the Marines. Despite managing to hold his own in their fight for 10 days, Aokiji however failed. He both lost the fight and allowed Akainu to become the next fleet admiral. Akainu however was surprisingly merciful and spared Aokiji's life after the battle. This however was only a small consolation. Aokiji's body was left covered in scars, and he had ended up losing his left leg in the fight. After Punk Hazard, Aokiji quit the Marines, and seemingly slumped into a depression, where he chose to spend his time drinking. What I've said so far makes the claim that Aokiji's loss to Akainu actually made him stronger sound pretty rich, as I've only focused on how devastating this defeat was for Kusan. However, I think that is exactly what ended up happening. Aokiji's loss has all the hallmarks of other defeats in the story that have made the character stronger. While Aokiji did go into a depression, this only lasted for a short while. The same year he lost to Akainu, Kusan ended up becoming a pirate and joining Blackbeard. While we still do not know what exactly his goal is working with someone like Teach, Kusan clearly has a lot of conviction in the path he has chosen, where he's even willing to fight his former mentor in the name of the Blackbeard Pirates. This is not to say that he has just become Blackbeard's mindless drone, however. Kusan still has his own views, as we for example see with him deciding to go rescue Smoker from Doflamingo, and telling the former to warn the Marines of the impending storm, which are actions that clearly do not gain the Blackbeard Pirates anything. By his own words, despite becoming a pirate, Kusan is still the same man he was, but he's simply trying to accomplish his goals outside the world government. Even though we don't know what Aokiji ultimately plans to do, one thing is for certain: this is not a man who was broken by his loss. In general, when characters in One Piece suffer a massive loss that breaks them, their answer is to cope and not accept it. The first case we see of this is with Don Krieg, who had his fleet annihilated by Mihawk on his first foray into the Grand Line. Instead of being realistic about his failure, Don Krieg decided to delude himself. In his mind, Krieg thought he never actually lost to Mihawk, and that the latter had used some devil fruit trick to destroy his ships. Krieg even went as far as calling himself the strongest man in the world, which is something he still told himself after also losing to Luffy. The way Mihawk describes him, Krieg is the type who never learns from his failures. Another example of a character who was broken by a loss is Gekko Moria. Moria suffered an even bigger loss than Don Krieg, where 23 years ago in Wano, Kaido actually ended up killing all of Moria's crewmates. Instead of accepting the loss and growing stronger from it, the trauma broke Moria. After Kaido, Moria stopped relying on his own strength and stopped having real followers, and instead started thinking that his zombies could fight all of his battles for him. Like Krieg, Moria was also extremely delusional, where he thought his zombies would be enough to get him his revenge against Kaido, and make him the Pirate King. An example of just how far Moria had fallen was the fact that the world government actually decided to eliminate him, simply because they thought that he had become too weak to be a warlord. Pun intended, Moria had become a shadow of his former self. When we compare Dawn Creek and Moria to Aokiji, Aokiji has very clearly gone another way and accepted his loss to Akainu. He doesn't lie to himself about actually having won, and he doesn't cope about what he could have done differently. Even though he is clearly hurt by the loss, Aokiji agreed to their conditions, allowed Akainu to become the fleet admiral, and has decided to move forward with his life. This is actually how Luffy himself deals with his failures. Even though he's hurt by them, Luffy manages to pick himself back up and come back from his many losses in the story. Luffy never lies to himself, and is completely honest whenever he suffers a loss. He doesn't always bounce back by himself, however. The biggest loss Luffy ever suffered in the story was the death of Ace, which completely broke him. In this case, it was actually Jinbei who helped Luffy recover and bounce back, which is something Luffy himself acknowledges. Very surprisingly, with Kusan, the role of Jinbei may have actually been fulfilled by the Blackbeard pirates. Blackbeard is the one who originally found Kusan drinking his sorrows away in a bar after losing to Akainu, and ended up providing him with his new direction in life. What Teach said to Kusan was, "The only thing pirates need is an alignment of interest. You're a free man. What do you want, Kusan?" One overlooked power that Blackbeard has is his charisma, where he even before Kusan managed to turn the prisoners he recruited from level 6 of Impel Down into his loyal comrades. While Kusan might still have his own angle, I think he on some level genuinely likes and respects Teach, and that this has played a big role in him getting over his loss to Akainu. Kusan is actually very relaxed in the Blackbeard pirates' company, and is even willing to make light of his fight with Akainu when hanging out with the crew. While Aokiji may still have some reservations about working with them, the Blackbeard pirates may have actually had a therapeutic effect on him. This video is not, however, about characters like Aokiji simply coming back from a loss, but about losses in this series actually making you stronger. This is once again something that is best exemplified by Luffy and the Straw Hat Pirates. Essentially, every time they suffer a major defeat, they try to learn from it and come back stronger. Often, this is actually seen in a very practical way, where they discover entirely new ways to fight as a result of their losses, and many times even end up copying their enemies' abilities. A good example of this is Luffy losing to CP9 at Water 7, which made him invent Gear 2nd and Gear 3rd based on the agent's abilities. An even bigger reason why losses in One Piece can be extremely beneficial is Haki. Haki is a power that is said to bloom in battle, but the very convenient thing about Haki is that it does not discriminate between winners and losers. Even if you are getting completely dominated by your opponent, your Haki will still bloom, due to the simple fact that you're fighting back. This is seen when Luffy actually manages to develop future sight observation Haki, through simply fighting a losing battle against Katakuri. Luffy later shows this again in fighting against Kaido, where even though he gets beaten multiple times, Luffy keeps coming back with stronger and stronger Haki. Luffy and the Straw Hats are, however, hardly the only examples of this, and the story is full of characters who've come back from losses with entirely different levels of Haki, and a much improved combat arsenal. In the case of Aokiji, even though he lost his 10-day fight against Akainu, his will was clearly still not broken. Putting everything said in this video together, the Aokiji that emerged from the ashes of the Akainu fight could be an entirely different animal from the Aokiji we saw in the pre-time skip. The fight on Punk Hazard is one of the biggest fights that has occurred in the story between top-tier fighters, and both combatants likely came out of it with much stronger Haki. With Aokiji, he could have also taken a lot of lessons from this failure. It's actually possible we already saw some of this in his fight against Garp. Aokiji demonstrates a new ability called Ice Glove, where he covers his hand in ice before using it to punch his opponent. While it's possible Aokiji always had this ability, as we for example know that Garp trained him how to use his fists, it's also possible this is something he developed after Punk Hazard. During Marineford, we saw that Akainu is actually someone very proficient in combining his Logia Devil Fruit with hand-to-hand combat. It could be that during their fight, Aokiji realized how effective of a technique this was, and later decided to develop his own ability, modeled on Akainu's Magma Fist. Aokiji also shows this other ice ability on Pirate Island, where he ends up freezing Hibari. Oh wait, my mistake. He had only just frozen the like button. Maybe take this opportunity to click it now that it's thawed out. Even if Aokiji had the Ice Glove ability before, we are still likely currently witnessing the strongest version of Kusan that we've seen in the story. It has now been 2 years since he's lost to Akainu, and Aokiji has seemingly both survived the mental scar of his loss and managed to reap its benefits into becoming a more powerful fighter. A good way to contextualize just how much stronger Kusan might have gotten is to once again compare him to Luffy. Both suffered a massive failure 2 years ago, but both managed to get back up from it and find their new path. Considering how much stronger Luffy got during the time skip, you can only imagine how much Aokiji grew, as he was already one of the strongest people in the world, had a full fight with a fellow admiral, and spent the rest of the time skip fighting under Blackbeard's flag. While I've talked a lot about Aokiji and the Straw Hats bouncing back from failure in this video, they are far from the only examples of this in the story. Very recently in the Egghead arc, we've actually seen several pre-time skip One Piece characters return to the manga, and it is absurd how much they've grown. Lucci and Kaku both were humiliated 2 years ago by the Straw Hats, and actually got fired by the world government after NES lobby. They are now however top-ranking CP0 agents with awakened devil fruits, and are strong enough to fight both the Seraphim and a Yonko crew. Another example are the Giant Warrior Pirates. In the pre-time skip, they were struggling heavily against the likes of Mr. Tree and the Galila shipwrights, yet they're now able to fight against the Five Elders. Then there's also someone like Crocodile, who got beaten by Luffy before he even had his gears, but has now returned as a Haki user able to easily dispatch Vice Admirals, and with a bounty higher than King the Wildfire or Marco the Phoenix. This is not just something new that has happened in the Egghead arc, but characters even outside the Straw Hats coming back stronger is something that has been happening since we were in the East Blue. Because of this, I'm actually very surprised that the fandom's reaction to major characters losing in the final saga has been to think that they will never come back, or that they will not actually be that important in the story's climax. In my experience, this has mainly been the reaction to Kid and Law's recent defeats at the hands of Shanks and Blackbeard. However, I would also extend this to more minor examples, like Kizaru, Sabo, the Korosei, or even Blackbeard himself. All of these characters have suffered failures and weak moments in the final saga, but I'm personally convinced that all of them will have major comebacks in the future. These are all characters that have been built up for years, or even decades, and all of them still have a lot of onus to play a major role in the endgame, far more than the likes of Dory and Broggy. More importantly for the topic of this video, however, many of these characters already have a history of failures in the story, and they've shown the capacity to learn and evolve from them. While it could be that the likes of Kid and Law are done for the story, to me, all the evidence is pointing towards this being their personal Akainu vs Aokiji moment, and that they will return and play a huge role in the final saga. A character losing or even getting annihilated in a fight has simply never been a death sentence in One Piece, and the far more consistent theme is that moments like this are almost a requirement to becoming strong. This is to a point where some of the strongest characters in the story, like Kaido and Loki, are introduced with us learning about their failures. Even someone like Shanks, who is arguably the most built-up character in the whole story, is in his first chapter seen getting foiled by Higuma and losing his arm. I mentioned him before in the video, but Don Creek actually recently returned to the story during the Egghead arc. He somehow made it all the way to the New World, and is currently on Pirate Island. While he was clearly a broken man when we saw him in Baratie, it's possible that somewhere along the way, he also managed to grow as a person, and finally learn something from his failures. I guess if even someone as arrogant as him can change, then no one in this story is beyond redemption. If you think I'm wrong about this topic, I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments. You could however also click any of these 3 videos, where I go over how Kid, Law, Kaido, Big Mom, and Katakuri could all come back to the story stronger than ever. As always, thanks a lot for watching this video to the end.